First Contact and Uneasy Beginnings. The sleek HFY diplomatic vessel glided into Earth's orbit, its iridescent hull shimmering against the backdrop of stars. Inside, Ambassador Nira Tizzle stood before a full-length mirror, adjusting her formal robes with trembling hands. Her violet skin glistened with nervous perspiration, and her large, almond-shaped eyes blinked rapidly. "You can do this, Nira," she whispered to her reflection. "The fate of the HFY Confederacy rests on your shoulders." As the youngest diplomat ever chosen to represent her people, Nira felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on her. The humans had only recently burst onto the galactic stage, their rapid technological advancements and aggressive expansion sending shockwaves through the established interstellar community. Now, with tensions rising between Earth and the HFY over disputed resource-rich systems, Nira had been tasked with negotiating a peaceful resolution. A chime sounded, signaling their approach to the massive human space station that would serve as neutral ground for the talks. Nira took a deep breath, steeling herself for the encounter ahead. She had studied human culture extensively, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of meeting them face to face. As she stepped off the shuttle and into the cavernous docking bay, Nira's senses were assaulted by the sights, sounds, and smells of humanity. The air was thick with the scent of metal and unfamiliar chemicals, and the cacophony of voices and machinery was overwhelming to her sensitive hearing. A small delegation approached, led by a tall, broad-shouldered man whose very presence seemed to dominate the space around him. This, Nira realized with a start, must be the infamous Commander Jake Sterling, hero of the Mars Rebellion and Earth's chief negotiator for these talks. "Ambassador Tizzle," Sterling's deep voice boomed as he extended a hand in greeting. "Welcome to Harmony Station." Nira hesitated, her eyes fixed on the commander's massive hand. In HFY culture, physical contact between strangers was considered highly intimate. Swallowing her discomfort, she reached out and grasped Sterling's hand, suppressing a shudder at the alien warmth of his skin. "Thank you, Commander Sterling," she replied, proud of how steady she kept her voice. "The HFY Confederacy is grateful for this opportunity to pursue peaceful dialogue." Sterling's piercing blue eyes seemed to bore into her, and Nira felt a strange flutter in her chest. Was this the fear her superiors had warned her about? The legendary human capacity for aggression and dominance? "Well," Sterling said, his lips curving into what Nira recognized as a smile, though it did little to soften his rugged features. "Let's hope that dialogue bears fruit. Follow me, Ambassador. We have much to discuss." As they walked through the station's winding corridors, Nira couldn't help but marvel at the diversity of the human crew. Unlike the uniform appearance of her own people, humans came in a startling array of colors, shapes, and sizes. It was both fascinating and terrifying. They arrived at a large conference room with a view of Earth below. The sight of the blue-green planet, swirled with white clouds, took Nira's breath away. It was beautiful, yes, but also a stark reminder of what was at stake. The humans' homeworld was running out of resources, driving their relentless expansion into space and into conflict with races like the HFY. "Please, have a seat," Sterling gestured to a chair at the long table. "Can I offer you any refreshments? Water? Coffee?" Nira shook her head, her tendrils swaying gently. "No, thank you. I'm fine." As she sat, she noticed Sterling watching her with undisguised curiosity. It made her uncomfortable, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. She would not show weakness. Not here, not now. "I'll be blunt, Ambassador," Sterling said as he took his seat across from her. "Earth needs the resources in the Proxima system. Your people's claim to it is tenuous at best." Nira felt a flare of indignation. "With all due respect, Commander, the HFY discovered and began surveying Proxima long before humans achieved faster-than-light travel. Our claim is based on generations of scientific research and exploration." Sterling leaned forward, his massive frame dominating the space between them. Discovery means nothing if you can't exploit those resources, Ambassador. Humanity's very survival depends on expanding our reach. Surely you can understand that. And what of our survival? Nira countered, surprised by the heat in her own voice. The Zarkay have based our entire economic future on the Proxima system. We cannot simply abandon it because a newcomer to the galactic stage demands it. For a moment, tension crackled between them. Nira braced herself, half expecting the human to explode into the violent rage she'd heard so much about. Instead, Sterling's face softened almost imperceptibly. "It seems we're at an impasse then," he said, leaning back in his chair. "But that's why we're here, isn't it? To find a solution that works for both our peoples." Nira nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. Perhaps these humans weren't as unreasonable as she'd been led to believe. "Yes, that is indeed why we're here. Perhaps if we start by examining the specific resources each of our species requires, we can find areas of potential cooperation rather than conflict." Sterling's eyebrows rose. A gesture Nira had learned indicated surprise or interest. "That's a constructive approach, Ambassador. I like it." As they delved into the details of their respective needs and capabilities, Nira found herself warming to the human commander. Yes, he was intimidating in his size and intensity, but there was also a sharp intelligence behind those blue eyes and a willingness to listen that she hadn't expected. Hours passed, and as they worked, Nira became increasingly aware of Sterling in ways that had nothing to do with diplomacy. The way his strong hands gestured as he spoke, the deep rumble of his laugh when she made a wry observation, the intensity of his focus when she presented complex data, it all combined to create a magnetism she found difficult to resist. "I think we've made good progress for our first day," Sterling said finally, stretching in a way that emphasized his powerful physique. Nira quickly averted her eyes, feeling a warmth spread across her cheeks. "Yes, I believe we have," she agreed, gathering her data pads. "Shall we reconvene tomorrow?" Sterling nodded, then hesitated. "Ambassador, would you care to join me for dinner? Strictly informal, of course. I thought you might appreciate the chance to experience some human cuisine." Nira's first instinct was to decline. Sharing a meal was an intimate act in Zarkay culture, typically reserved for family or close friends. But she was here to build bridges between their species, wasn't she? And if she was honest with herself, the idea of spending more time with Sterling was far from unappealing. "I would be honored, Commander," she said, hoping her nervousness didn't show. As they left the conference room together, Nira felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. She had come here expecting to face a brutal, savage race. Instead, she found herself drawn to this human in ways she never could have anticipated. What did it mean for her mission? For her people? For herself? Only time would tell. But as she walked beside Commander Sterling, listening to him describe the wonders of human cooking with obvious enthusiasm, Nira Tizzle knew one thing for certain. Her journey on Harmony Station was going to be far more complicated and far more interesting than she ever could have imagined. Growing tensions and unexpected connections. As days turned into weeks, the negotiations between the Zarkay and humans grew increasingly complex. Nira found herself spending long hours in tense discussions, not just with Commander Sterling, but with a rotating cast of human experts and politicians. The sheer diversity of human opinions and approaches continually surprised her. One particularly grueling session left Nira feeling drained and frustrated. She stood at the viewport in her quarters, gazing out at the stars, when a chime at her door startled her from her reverie. "Enter," she called, turning to see Commander Sterling step into the room. Her heart did an odd little flutter at the sight of him. "Ambassador," he said, his deep voice tinged with concern. "I thought you might want to discuss today's setback privately." Nira sighed, her tendrils drooping slightly. "Is that what we're calling it? A setback? Commander, your agricultural minister practically accused us of deliberately withholding terraforming technology." Sterling ran a hand through his short-cropped hair, a gesture Nira had come to recognize as a sign of frustration. Minister Chen can be abrasive, but you have to understand, Earth is desperate. Our population is growing. Our resources are dwindling. The idea that your people might have technology that could help us transform barren worlds. Technology that is integral to our way of life, our very culture. Nira interrupted, her usual shyness giving way to passion. Would you ask a painter to give up their brushes? A musician their instrument? Our terraforming abilities are not just tools, Commander. They are part of who we are as a species. Sterling moved closer, and Nira felt that now familiar mix of intimidation and attraction. I understand that, Nira. Truly, I do. But surely there must be some middle ground. Some way we can benefit from your knowledge without compromising your cultural integrity. The use of her first name sent a shiver down Nira's spine. When had they slipped into such familiarity? And why didn't it bother her more? Perhaps, she said softly, turning back to the viewport, but it would require trust on both sides. And after today's accusations, I'm not sure that trust exists. She felt Sterling's presence behind her, radiating warmth in the cool air of her quarters. Then we'll have to build it, he said, his voice low and determined. Step by step, day by day. Nira turned to face him, suddenly acutely aware of how close they were standing. She could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes, smell the faint, spicy scent that seemed uniquely his. And how do you propose we do that, Commander? A slow smile spread across Sterling's face. Well, for starters, you could call me Jake, at least when we're not in official meetings. Nira felt a blush creep across her violet skin. I'm not sure that would be appropriate. Maybe not. Sterling. Jake. Agreed. But I think it might help. The more we see each other as individuals, not just representatives of our species, the easier it will be to find common ground. There was logic in his words, Nira had to admit, and hadn't she already crossed lines of formality by sharing meals with him, discussing topics that went far beyond their official negotiations? Very well. Jake, she said, testing the name on her tongue. It felt strange, intimate. Then you must call me Nira. His smile widened, and Nira felt something warm unfurl in her chest. I'd like that, Nira. Now, what do you say we get out of here for a while? There's a new holodeck program I think you might enjoy, a recreation of one of Earth's most beautiful natural wonders. Part of Nira knew she should decline. They had early meetings tomorrow, mountains of data to review, but a larger part of her, a part that had been growing stronger with each passing day, wanted nothing more than to spend time with this fascinating, confounding human. I'd like that, she found herself saying. As they walked together through the station's corridors, Nira was acutely aware of the looks they received. Humans and the few other alien diplomats stationed here all seemed surprised to see the Zarke ambassador and the human commander in such casual company. Jake led her to a large, featureless room that she recognized as a holodeck. With a few commands to the computer, the blank walls shimmered and transformed. Suddenly, Nira found herself standing on the edge of a vast canyon, painted in shades of red and gold by the setting sun. Welcome to the Grand Canyon, Jake said, his voice filled with pride. One of the natural wonders of Earth. Nira gasped, overwhelmed by the sheer scale and beauty of the landscape. It's incredible, she breathed, moving closer to the edge to peer down into the depths of the canyon. Jake came to stand beside her, pointing out various features and explaining how the canyon had been formed over millions of years. As he spoke, Nira found herself captivated not just by the scenery, but by the passion in his voice. You love your world very much, don't you? She asked softly. Jake nodded, his expression turning serious. I do. That's why I pushed so hard in our negotiations, Nira. I've seen what's happening to Earth, the overcrowding, the resource depletion. I don't want to see my home destroyed. Nira felt a pang of empathy. I understand. The Zarke. We faced similar challenges in our past. It's why we developed our terraforming technologies in the first place. Jake turned to her, his eyes alight with interest. Really? I didn't know that. Would you tell me more? And so, as the holographic sun set over the Grand Canyon, Nira found herself opening up about her people's history in a way she never had before. She told Jake about the Great Withering, a climate disaster that had nearly wiped out Zarkai civilization centuries ago. How it had driven them to develop technologies that could restore dead worlds to life. How those same technologies had become sacred, a cornerstone of Zarkai's spirituality and culture. In turn, Jake shared stories of humanity's struggles and triumphs. He spoke of wars and famines, but also of incredible acts of cooperation and ingenuity, of how humans had pulled themselves back from the brink of self-destruction and reached for the stars. As they talked, the barriers between them seemed to melt away. Nira no longer saw Jake as just a human, an adversary to be wary of. He was a person, complex and contradictory, capable of both great strength and surprising gentleness. And Jake, she realized with a start, was looking at her differently too. Gone was the guarded diplomatic mask he usually wore. In its place was an expression of genuine interest, even admiration. "You know," he said as their conversation finally wound down, "I think I understand your people's position better now. I can see why you guard your terraforming technology so closely." Nira nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. "And I think I better understand humanity's desperation. Perhaps there is a way we can help each other without compromising our principles." Jake's hand found hers, warm and strong. The touch sent a jolt through Nira's body, but she didn't pull away. "I think you might be right," he said softly. "We just need to keep talking, keep trying to understand each other." As they stood there, hand in hand, looking out over the simulated grandeur of the Grand Canyon, Nira felt something shift inside her. The fear and suspicion she had carried since arriving on Harmony Station began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of connection. Not just to Jake, but to the possibility of true cooperation between their peoples. But even as hope blossomed, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered a warning. She was getting too close, too invested. What would happen when the real challenges came? When the interests of their species inevitably clashed? Could this fragile understanding they were building survive? Only time would tell. But for now, in this moment, Nira allowed herself to simply be present, to enjoy the company of this remarkable human who had somehow broken through all her defenses. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew that this night had changed everything. For better or for worse, there was no going back. Crisis and collaboration. The following weeks saw a marked improvement in the negotiations between the Zarkai and humans. Nira and Jake's growing understanding of each other's perspectives helped bridge many gaps, leading to several promising compromises. However, not everyone was pleased with this progress. One morning, as Nira prepared for another round of talks, an urgent message flashed across her communication terminal. Her heart raced as she read the encrypted text from the Zarkai High Council. Ambassador Tizol, credible intelligence suggests human extremist faction planning attack on Proxima Research Outpost. Protect our people and interests at all costs. Negotiations may be compromised. Await further instructions. Nira's mind reeled. Could this be true? Were humans really planning an attack, even as they spoke of peace? And Jake, had he known about this? She was still grappling with the implications when her door chimed. Jake's voice came through the intercom, sounding strained. "Nira, we need to talk. It's urgent." Taking a deep breath to steady herself, Nira opened the door. Jake rushed in, his face grim. "We have a situation," he said without preamble. "Our intelligence just picked up chatter about a potential attack on your outpost in the Proxima system." Nira's tendrils twitched in surprise. You know about this." Jake's eyes widened. "You've heard something too." "Nira, I swear to you, if this attack happens, it's not sanctioned by Earth's government. We think it's a radical group called Terran First. They believe humanity should take what it needs by force." Relief washed over Nira, followed quickly by shame for having doubted Jake. I received a warning from my government as well. They feared it might be an official human action. Jake shook his head vehemently. Never. We're trying to prevent war, not start one. He began pacing the room, his powerful frame taut with tension. The problem is, we don't have any ships close enough to intervene in time. If we alert the outpost, the attackers might accelerate their plans. Naira's diplomatic training kicked in, her mind racing through possibilities. The Zarkay have a defense fleet in the system, but they're spread thin. If we could combine our intelligence, pinpoint the likely attack vector, we might be able to position your ships to intercept. Jake finished, nodding. But Naira, that would mean sharing classified information. Are you authorized to do that? She hesitated. Strictly speaking, no, she wasn't. But lives were at stake, both Zarkay and potentially human, if this attack sparked a wider conflict. I will take responsibility for the decision, she said firmly. The potential benefits outweigh the risks. Jake's face softened, and he reached out to squeeze her shoulder gently. You're braver than you give yourself credit for, you know that. Naira felt a flush of warmth at his touch and words, but there was no time to dwell on it. We should go to the command center, she said. We'll need access to both our communication networks to coordinate this effectively. What followed was a whirlwind of activity. Naira and Jake worked side by side, pooling their resources and expertise. She marveled at the efficiency of their collaboration, how they seemed to anticipate each other's needs and ideas. As they pieced together the intelligence, a clearer picture emerged. The extremist group had somehow acquired an experimental stealth ship, planning to slip past the Zarkay defenses and strike at the heart of the research outpost. There, Naira said, pointing to a star chart. If we position our ships here and here, we should be able to create a net they can't slip through. Jake nodded, already relaying the information to his superiors on Earth. We're also dispatching a rapid response team. They won't get there in time to prevent the attack, but they can help with aftermath and potentially catch these bastards if they try to escape. Hours ticked by intense silence as they waited for news. Naira found herself drawing closer to Jake, taking comfort in his steady presence. When his hand found hers, she intertwined her fingers with his without hesitation. Finally, a transmission came through. The Zarkay fleet had successfully intercepted the stealth ship. The attack had been thwarted with minimal casualties. A cheer went up in the command center. Without thinking, Naira threw her arms around Jake, caught up in the moment of relief and triumph. He hugged her back tightly, lifting her off her feet. We did it, he murmured into her ear. Together. As the initial euphoria faded, Naira became acutely aware of their embrace, of the firm planes of Jake's body pressed against hers. She pulled back slightly, looking up into his eyes. What she saw there made her breath catch. Admiration, affection, and something deeper, more intense. Jake, she began, not sure what she wanted to say. He cupped her face gently with one large hand. Naira, I know this is complicated. Our peoples, our positions, but I can't deny what I'm feeling anymore. These past weeks, working with you, getting to know you, I've never met anyone like you. Naira's heart raced. She knew she should step back, maintain professional distance, but the events of the day, the fear and relief and adrenaline, had stripped away her usual reservations. I feel the same, she admitted softly. But Jake, in this, could this ever really work? Instead of answering with words, Jake lowered his head and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened as Naira responded, her arms tightening around his neck. It was alien and familiar all at once, strange yet somehow perfectly right. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Jake rested his forehead against hers. I don't know what the future holds, he said quietly, but I know I want to find out. Together. Naira nodded, her mind spinning with the implications of what had just happened. She knew there would be consequences, challenges they couldn't even imagine yet, But in that moment, with the afterglow of their shared victory still humming through her veins, she couldn't bring herself to care. They had faced a crisis together and emerged stronger. Whatever came next, they would face it the same way, not as Zarkai and human, but as partners, united in their desire for peace and their growing feelings for each other. As they left the command center hand in hand, Nira felt a sense of both trepidation and excitement. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time since she'd arrived on Harmony Station, she felt truly hopeful about the future, for herself, for Jake, and for the possibility of genuine understanding between their peoples. Personal revelations and diplomatic breakthroughs. The aftermath of the thwarted attack brought a new energy to the negotiations between the Zarkai and humans. The collaborative effort to prevent disaster had demonstrated the potential benefits of cooperation, and both sides seemed more willing to find common ground. However, for Nira and Jake, navigating their personal relationship alongside their professional duties proved challenging. They had agreed to keep their budding romance private, knowing that it could complicate the already delicate diplomatic situation. One evening, after a particularly productive negotiation session, Nira found herself alone with Jake in one of the station's observation lounges. The swirling blues and greens of Earth filled the viewport, a constant reminder of what was at stake. "You were brilliant today," Jake said, his voice warm with admiration. "The way you proposed the joint research initiative, I think it could be a game changer." Nira felt a flush of pride, but also a twinge of guilt. "Jake, I need to confess something. The idea wasn't entirely mine. I've been in secret communication with a group of progressive Zarkai scientists. They're the ones who suggested we could share some aspects of our terraforming technology without compromising our core cultural practices." Jake's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Secret communication? Nira, that's a big risk. If your government found out." "I know," she said, her tendrils curling anxiously. "But after everything that's happened, after getting to know you and your people, I realized we needed to find a new approach. The old ways, the secrecy and isolation, they're not sustainable." Jake was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Then he chuckled softly. "You know, it's funny. I've been doing something similar." Now it was Nira's turn to be surprised. "What do you mean?" "I've been in talks with some of Earth's top environmental scientists and ethical philosophers," Jake explained. "They've been helping me understand the deeper implications of your terraforming technologies, not just the practical applications, but the philosophical and moral aspects." Nira felt a surge of emotion, gratitude, admiration, and something deeper that she was still afraid to name. "You've been studying our culture, our beliefs." Jake nodded, reaching out to take her hand. His touch sent a now familiar warmth through her. "I wanted to understand, Nira, not just for the negotiations, but for us. I know how important your traditions are to you." Overwhelmed, Nira leaned into him, resting her head on his broad chest. She could hear the steady beat of his single heart, so different from the dual rhythm of her own. "Thank you," she whispered. They stood like that for a while, watching the stars and the blue marble of Earth. Finally, Nira spoke again. "Jake, what are we doing? This thing between us, is it just complicating everything?" Jake's arms tightened around her. "Maybe," he admitted, "but I think it's also helping. Nira, getting to know you, caring about you. It's made all of this real for me in a way it wasn't before. You're not just some alien diplomat anymore. You're a person with hopes and fears and dreams. And I think that's what both our peoples need. To see each other as people, not just as competitors or threats." Nira pulled back slightly to look up at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. "You really believe we can make a difference, don't you?" "I do," Jake said firmly. "And I think we already are. That joint research initiative you proposed today, it's going to bring our best minds together, Zarkai and human. Who knows what we might discover, what new solutions we might find." As they discussed the possibilities, Nira felt a growing sense of excitement. The idea of Zarkay and human scientists working side by side, sharing knowledge and perspectives, opened up a world of potential she had never considered before. "We'll need to be careful, though," she cautioned. "There are still those on both sides who fear change, who see any compromise as weakness." Jake nodded gravely. "You're right. We've already seen how far some extremists will go to protect what they see as their interests. We'll need to be vigilant, but also transparent. The more we can show the benefits of cooperation, the harder it will be for the hardliners to justify their positions." As they continued to talk, bouncing ideas off each other and refining their approach, Nira realized something profound. This, right here, was exactly what they had been striving for in the negotiations. True collaboration, a meeting of minds and cultures that produced something greater than the sum of its parts. And it had all started with them, with two individuals from vastly different worlds finding common ground, learning to trust and care for each other. "Jake," she said suddenly, her voice filled with determination, "I think it's time we stop hiding." He looked at her quizzically. "What do you mean?" "This, us," she gestured between them. "Our relationship. I think it could be a symbol, a living example of what we're trying to achieve on a larger scale." Jake's eyes widened as he grasped her meaning. "Nira, are you sure? The political implications will be complex." "Yes," she finished for him. "But think about it. If we can show that a Zarkay and a human can not only work together but form a deep personal bond, doesn't that challenge all the assumptions both our peoples have been operating under?" A slow smile spread across Jake's face. "It's risky," he said. "But then again, all the best things in life are. If you're sure about this, I'm with you all the way." Nira felt a weight lift from her shoulders. No more hiding, no more pretending their feelings didn't exist. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them openly and honestly. "Then let's do it," she said, her voice filled with newfound confidence. "Tomorrow, at the General Assembly, we'll announce our relationship and our new joint initiatives together." As Jake pulled her close for a kiss, Nira felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was more than just a personal choice. It was a step towards a future where Zarkay and humans could stand together as allies, friends, and maybe even something more. The path ahead would not be easy. There would be opposition, misunderstanding, perhaps even danger. But as she looked into Jake's eyes, seeing her own hope and determination reflected there, Nira knew they were ready to face whatever came their way. Together, they were about to change the course of history for both their peoples. And in doing so, they might just forge a new future for the entire galaxy. A new era of understanding. The Grand Assembly Hall of Harmony Station buzzed with anticipation. Representatives from Earth and the Zarkay Confederacy, along with observers from other galactic powers, filled the tiered seating. At the center of it all stood Nira and Jake, their hands clasped tightly as they prepared to address the gathering. Nira's heart raced, her violet skin flushed with a mix of nerves and excitement. She glanced at Jake, drawing strength from his steady presence. He gave her hand a reassuring squeeze, and she took a deep breath. "Esteemed colleagues," Nira began, her voice clear and strong despite her inner turmoil. "We stand before you today not just as representatives of our respective peoples, but as living proof that true understanding and cooperation between our species is possible." A murmur rippled through the crowd as Jake stepped forward. "Ambassador Tizzle and I have worked closely over these past months, seeking common ground and solutions to the challenges that have divided us. In that time, we've discovered something extraordinary." Nira picked up the thread. "We found that when we look beyond our differences, when we truly strive to understand one another, we can achieve far more together than we ever could apart." As they laid out their proposals for joint scientific endeavors, shared resource management, and cultural exchange programs, Nira could see the mix of reactions in the audience. Some faces showed interest and hope, others skepticism, and a few outright hostility. Finally, they reached the most controversial part of their presentation. Jake's voice was firm as he announced, "And in the spirit of full transparency, Ambassador Tizzle, and I wish to inform you all that our collaboration has extended beyond the professional realm. We have developed a deep personal bond, one that we believe symbolizes the potential for unity between our peoples." The hall erupted in a cacophony of voices. Some delegates leaped to their feet, shouting questions or objections. Others sat in stunned silence. Nera felt a moment of panic, but Jake's steady presence beside her kept her grounded. "We understand this news may come as a shock," Nera said, raising her voice to be heard over the din. "But we ask you to consider, if two individuals from such different worlds can find common ground, can learn to trust and care for one another, doesn't that suggest that our peoples as a whole are capable of the same?" As the initial furor died down, questions began pouring in. How would this affect the negotiations? Wasn't there a conflict of interest? What did their respective governments think of this development? Nera and Jake answered each query honestly and openly, emphasizing that their personal relationship had deepened their commitment to finding mutually beneficial solutions. They outlined safeguards they had put in place to ensure the integrity of the diplomatic process, including bringing in additional oversight from both sides. Hours passed as they fielded questions and defended their proposals. It was grueling, but as the session wore on, Nera began to sense a shift in the room. The initial shock and skepticism were giving way to curiosity, and in some cases, cautious optimism. One of the human delegates, an older woman with silver hair, stood up. "I've been involved in interspecies diplomacy for over 4 decades," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. "And I've never seen anything quite like this. It's unorthodox, certainly. Risky, without a doubt. But it's also inspiring. Perhaps it's time we all started thinking outside the box." Her words seemed to break a dam. More voices joined in, not all supportive, but many at least willing to consider the possibilities. By the time the session ended, Nera felt drained but hopeful. They had taken a tremendous risk, but it seemed to be paying off. As the delegates filed out, many stopped to speak with Nera and Jake personally. Some offered congratulations, others voiced concerns, but all seemed genuinely engaged with the ideas they had presented. Finally, as the last of the crowd dispersed, Nera and Jake found themselves alone in the vast hall. They turned to each other, both a little shell-shocked by the intensity of the day. "Well," Jake said with a wry smile, "that was terrifying, exhilarating, completely insane." Nera supplied, her tendrils curling with amusement. Jake laughed, pulling her into a warm embrace. "All of the above. But you were amazing, Nera. The way you handled those questions, the passion in your voice. I've never been prouder to stand beside anyone." Nera relaxed into his arms, feeling the tension of the day begin to ebb away. "We did it together," she murmured, "just like we'll face whatever comes next together." And there would be challenges ahead, they both knew. Their announcement had sent shockwaves through both their governments. There would be opposition, possibly even attempts to separate them or derail their initiatives. But they had also gained powerful allies and sparked a new conversation about the future of human-Zarkai relations. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms with the stars shining through the viewport behind them, Nera felt a profound sense of peace. Whatever trials lay ahead, she knew they were on the right path. They had taken the first steps towards a new era of understanding, not just between their two species, but across the galaxy. "You know," Jake said softly, his breath warm against her skin, "when I first met you, I never imagined we'd end up here. You seemed so shy, so uncertain." Nera chuckled. "And you seemed so intimidating, this big, brash human commander. I was terrified of you. And now?" Jake asked, a hint of vulnerability in his voice. Nera pulled back slightly to look into his eyes. "Now," she said, her voice filled with warmth, "you're my partner, my confidant, my—" She hesitated, then decided to embrace the human term, "my love. And together, I think we might just change the universe." As their lips met in a tender kiss, Nira felt a sense of certainty settle over her. The road ahead would not be easy, but with Jake by her side, with the vision they shared of a united future, she was ready to face any challenge. The shy alien diplomat and the savage human commander had found something extraordinary in each other, and in doing so, they had opened the door to a new era of cooperation and understanding that would reshape the galaxy for generations to come. As they left the assembly hall hand in hand, ready to face whatever the future might bring, Nira knew that their greatest adventure was only just beginning, and she couldn't wait to see where it would lead.